Hey everybody, we'll just make a wee start at that. So, a welcome, and to many people on here, welcome back. I know there's quite a few common names from yesterday's webinar as well, so good to see a return customer as well. Welcome to this second Tenancy webinar through the Farm Advisory Service. Basically, today we'll just get cracked into it. The main thing to think about is this is your webinar, so we need we're here to take to field questions from you. We do that through either the chat function or the Q&A function, same as we've done on all other webinars. But please don't be shy to put questions in there, and again, we'll try and handle as many of them as we can. If there's any we don't get to, we'll get back to you individually. So yeah, please do put them in. Today we are joined by Jennifer Galloway, who's an agricultural consultant like me, but working out of Stranraer office. Jennifer's also a bit of a tenancy specialist, and I know she'll introduce herself a wee bit more fully just in a second. So today we're looking at types of tenancy options, and then also a wee bit of how to go about applying. What does the application actually require? So I'll do a wee bit of that, and then hopefully we can get a bit of a few questions coming in, maybe a wee more focused on applications as well. So that's the plan anyway, and we'll try and be maybe about 40 minutes or so would be the ambition at the moment. So without any further ado, I'll just hand over to Jennifer. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks, Robert. So yes, I'm just here to give you the basic rundown on agricultural tenancies in Scotland. So if you could do the next slide, please, Robert.
Yes.
Today I'm going to cover the main tenancy types that you are probably already aware of, but I'll just go into a wee bit more detail on them. The main ones covered in Scotland that we see quite regularly are grazing and crop licenses, which are the ones under a year. Then we move on to short limited duration tenancies, modern limited duration tenancies, and then we've also got repairing tenancies, which are a more recent introduction, and also contract farming, which is becoming quite popular too. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So to give you a bit of background, my name is Jennifer, as Robert said. I work out of the Stranraer office down in the southwest. However, I came to the SAC with a background in land agency work, working in the private sector for both landlords and tenants. I've recently become chartered, and specialise in landlord and tenancy in both housing and agricultural tenancy work. So to move on from that, all tenancies in Scotland are governed by three laws or legislation acts. The first one is the 1991 Agricultural Holdings Act, which you might also hear referred to as secure tenancies. Unfortunately, these are no longer offered to new tenants, but there are many of these still in existence, and these are the ones that tenants can succeed with. So they can be multi-generational, and there is no end limit with them until such time that a tenant wants to come out of a tenancy. In 2003, the Agricultural Holdings Act was introduced to bring in the more modern tenancies, which is the short limited duration tenancy, and limited duration tenancies, which have since been succeeded by MLDTs, the modern limited ones. And then in 2016, the Land Reform Act that brought in the modern limited duration tenancies, which replaced the LDTs, and is also introduced the repairing tenancies. So if we just move on, please, Robert. So I'll just do a brief run through of the tenancies that are available to anyone at the moment. So the first one are grazing or crop licenses, are also known as seasonal lets. These are limited to 364 days of the year. There must be at least one full day free on the ground for it to be qualified as a seasonal let. It can be used for either livestock or cropping. So livestock tends to run, from sort of like the spring to the late autumn, early winter, and the cropping tends to be for a minimum, say, 6 months. And they just generally follow good agricultural practice. There's no hard and fast layout for an agreement. They just follow good agricultural practice, as I said, and the terms can be decided between a landlord and tenant. Moving on to the next slide, please. Following on from that, a longer tenancy is a short limited duration tenancy, and this was introduced in the 2003 Act. It's got a maximum term of 5 years. We usually see these running between 3 and 5 years. And within them, fixed equipment is included. And this leads us on to a conversation we'll have later about record of conditions for tenancies. They're very popular SLDTs with landlords if they have a new tenant coming onto the farm, because it is a shorter period. So if anything doesn't work out, there's no obligation. There's a shorter obligation for both landlord and tenant. However, it can go against as well, because it doesn't give the longevity that maybe tenants need or the security they need for a farming business. An SLDD can convert into an MLDT after 5 years if it's not terminated following the Act as required. And then it sort of flip-flops for periods of time. But it's quite common for these to just convert automatically into an MLDT whether or not there's been a discussion with the landlord or not. Notice that there is no termination in an SLDT. Usually they just run their term of time, so whether it's 3, 4, 5 years, and then it's expected that the tenant will remove themselves from the farm, and if they don't, that's when an MLDT can occur. But it's a very sticky area, and if you're not sure about that, I would always advise gaining additional advice on the matter. Moving on to the next slide, please. So following on from an SLDT is a modern limited duration tenancy. And as I said, this came in the 2016 Act and replaced the limited duration tenancy, which was previously in place. The minimum term for these is 10 years with no maximum term. And again, fixed equipment is included in this tenancy. Rent reviews can also occur in an MLDT. And there's also a break clause for new entrants after 5 years, which is just gives that wee bit of reassurance if you are a very new venture, a new business, and you want to see how things go. You've got that get out clause. This type of tenancy does need a notice to terminate, which is set out in the Act, and it needs to be followed correctly within the timeframes given. Moving on to the next slide, please. So more recently introduced is a repairing tenancy. And these came in the 2016 Act. They have a minimum term of 35 years. However, after 5 years, they do have a repairing period with a break clause similar to the MLDT. They follow also similar legislation to the MLDT. However, going into these, you do require a considerable amount of capital, because you will be expected to bring the farm back up into a serviceable occupation. Moving on to the next slide, please. Finally, the last tenancy I'm going to cover is the contract farming, which is getting more and more popular and has come over, I think, from our Australian and New Zealand cousins. In this case, it's a bit unusual, where the landlord is the farmer and the tenant is the contractor. The farmer provides the capital, which is the land, basically the farm, the land and the buildings, and the contractor supplies the labour and machinery. The day-to-day running of the farm is overseen by is done by the contractor, with the farmer, or the landlord in this case, taking a back seat almost. Depending on the agreement, the contractor is entitled to a fixed payment and share of profits, and the farmer or the landlord receives a basic fee and also a share in the profits. There's a lot of tax benefits for the landlord/farmer in this case, which is why it's quite attractive to landlords. And it can also be a great way of new entrants getting into tenancies. However, you need to have a good working relationship between the two parties for this to work, so that both are getting a fair go at it and no one is being taken advantage of. Moving on to the next slide, please. And that's me. So,
yep. A seamless handover. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jennifer. And we'll come back to expand on a lot of that, hopefully, in questions later on. Now, just basically briefly, I've got a wee bit about business planning and tenancy applications. So often, we as business consultants do a lot of business planning. We do a lot of budgets. We do a lot of financial work. And some of the best jobs we get to do are actually those tenancy applications where we've got an exciting a proposal on the table. You know, the business plan that's done to extend an overdraft is can be for us. It's important work, but it's a bit dry. You know, it's not that exciting. Whereas if we've got a tenancy application where we're creating a new system, where we're really building a business on paper, to me, that's some of the best jobs that we actually do. To the point we get quite engaged in them, quite competitive about them, and then if the client is unsuccessful, often we are more disappointed than they are. So, interesting. You know, as I say, that's a real positive job. But what we're doing ultimately for a tenancy application is pretty much the same as what we're doing for an application to the bank to build a shed or buy some land or that type of thing. The actual nuts and bolts of the business plan are pretty much the same. And it also they shout out to the best business plan is the one that's, or the best budget is the one that's actually an actual management tool as part of the business, a budget and monitor. So if we do a good job in a tenancy application, it's good discipline to actually continue to carry that budget through, to monitor it quarterly and see what your actual performance is going to be. Really good for tax planning, really good for knowing where your business is actually at, because it never performs the way we expect it to perform on paper at the outset. You know, there's always things changing. But the bones of the a good business plan, and I would say often in the tenancy application, they're all different as well, but they ask for specific things. So they ask for each one will ask for something slightly different. But if you do a full business plan, all of what you need for the tenancy application will be within that. So it's a professionally produced a document that's there, and it has everything it needs. Now, I'm saying professionally produced, it doesn't necessarily need to be done by a consultant like Jennifer or I. You can do a really good job yourself if you know what you're working with. And I'll come on to some resources on the Farm Advisory Service website. We briefly touched on them yesterday, but there's some good resources there that actually allow you to build up your business plan. And again, often what we find the best results come from the plans when we are doing them is when the farmer's actually done a lot of legwork to start with, done a rough budget themselves, got a really good handle on what they want to do. When we get someone that comes in who just wants us to get the farm, it's really quite difficult to actually get our teeth into it and make sure we can produce a budget that's actually going to work. Whereas if you've done the legwork, knowing how many cows you're going to carry, how many calves you're going to rear, when you're going to sell them, how much feed you're putting in, all that type of information is so important for us to get it right. So that's the kind of proposed farming policy position. So that's a big chunk of what the application and the business plan actually is. The other part, which is probably it's very important anyway for a tenancy application, is the capital requirements, the current financial position that you've got. So what savings are you putting in? What borrowing are you going to get? And often you think it's a bit personal showing them that, but you've got to keep in mind we're going to have a long-standing relationship with this landlord. So you do want to be in a position where you can really say, look, here's me, warts and all. This is where we're at, and this is what we're hoping to achieve with the farm that you're going to give us. So some legwork in that area is really quite important. And then a really clear summary. So a summary, executive summary at the start to say, here's who we are, here's what we're going to do, here's the rent we're offering, and here's how we're going to pay for it, is actually the bit. You do the great big business plan that's lots of pages long, and really, certainly in the first round, to get through the initial application stage, that strong summary is the bit you really want to nail it, to get it right. Then obviously we've got other appendices and stuff that we add in, but these are all pretty standard. The point I'm pointing out how standardized it is. The beauty of that is if you know you're hoping to apply for a tenancy in the next few years, you can do a lot of this stuff in the background to work up where you expect to be or where you hope to be in the next few years. And then when we get the details for the tenancy and what rent we're going to offer, how big the farm actually is, you can add that back in and we can amend these fairly quickly. So actually we can be really proactive and be ready to submit an application not long after the application is actually announced. So why do it? Why bother? So obviously we're applying for a tenancy, so that's the main reason for doing it. But it's also a really important tool. The bank asks for it, the landlord asks for it. We should actually be asking ourselves for it. And this is not us touting for trade either. This is a even the business plan, the budget that you do on the back of a fag pack at the kitchen table is a really good management tool to know where your business is going. Allows you to manage risk, to know, how exposed are you to the debt you've got, to interest rates, to milk price, to whatever else. It's a good place to. You're better to do trial and error on paper as you are on the hoof. It is a day-to-day management tool, so it's a day-to-day decision-making tool. I mean, I know most tenancy applications will go in the filing cabinet and won't be used day to day, but I would encourage you, once you've done one, is to pull it back out every now and again to have a wee look, see where we are. Are you on track? Are you doing better than you thought you would be? Does that mean you can invest quicker, you can get to where you want to be quicker? Or are you going a bit slower and maybe you need to pull back some of those investments and just manage your own expectations? And yeah, these slides will be available and the recordings available later. So the two bits, I suppose, the two things that a budget or business plan can do for you is look at the profitability of your business. So the worthwhileness, was it worth doing in the end? And the other thing is feasibility, and that's to do with cash needs and cash flow. So it's interesting. We do see it quite often. We see profitable businesses with poor cash flows, and we see businesses making a loss, sometimes with a reasonably good cash flow. So understanding the difference between the two of them is really quite important. And ultimately, if you're setting out as a new entrant, applying for a tenancy, you've got to start with a business that's profitable and feasible. So it's worthwhile and it's feasible. If we're starting off in a loss-making enterprise, what are we expecting to achieve over the 10 or 20 years of that lease? We need to be knowing that your business is fit to pay the rent and pay you whilst also growing. So those things are really important. And that's why the initial business plan, the one that perhaps doesn't even have the tenancy in mind, just the looking at the feasibility of running 150 dairy cows or 1,000 ewes or whatever it is. Look at the feasibility, look at the bare bones of that budget and make sure that's where you want to take your business and take your life. Also, we need to think when we're doing that is we need to look at risk. We need to look at probably exposure, sensitivity to prices. So what happens if the price of milk drops by 10 pence a litre? What happens if lambs aren't £140? What if they're £80? Where does that leave your business? And also the practicalities goes without saying. Can it be done? But personal preferences are allowed. There are people out there who want to take on a tenancy who don't want to milk cows. That's absolutely okay. But you need to know on paper that whatever you're proposing to do is actually going to have a positive outcome, and it fits with your financial needs, but also what makes you happy. Because that ultimately, if you're not happy, it's a 20-year lease can feel like a long time if it's not something you're enjoying doing. Assumptions, that's really a slide so important that we use realistic assumptions. Remember, the first person that this business plan is done for, or this tenancy application is done for, is you. So don't use figures that aren't going to be, in any way possible. We always budget on a not necessarily worst case scenario, but on a much poorer scenario than you think. So I was doing a budget yesterday for a dairy farmer, and he's currently getting 39 pence a litre, and we budgeted it at 34. And that's just to have the, quite a bit of wriggle room there. Is it going to be 34 pence a litre? It could be. Worst case scenario, I've done budgets. Last year I did a budget for a farmer who, a good few years ago, we put 9 pence a litre in his milk price, and this budget we put 50 pence a litre in. So it's difficult to stress test it to the nth degree, but we certainly need to know that there's a very high chance of what we are seeing output wise and input wise is going to work. So your outputs are going to be cheaper and your inputs are probably going to be a wee bit dearer than they are at the moment, just to make sure that the business is going to stand that. And use good sources of information, and also reference those if you're in a business plan, or if you're writing a business plan. Do put references in. Do say where you got the information, because it always holds more water if you can be quite open with where you got your information from, and use credible sources. The what if thing, I've kind of covered that, but what if bad things happen? What are the critical success factors in the business? So what do you need to happen to make your business go? There's a lot of things we worry about which don't actually impact the business too much, and there's some things we don't worry about which really do. So at that stage, we need to look at those critical success factors and tattoo them on your heart. Make sure you know what the potential stumbling blocks are for you, so you know if you see them coming, you know that they're going to have a big issue. So the three key elements to any business plan or tenancy application are cash flow, profit, and capital. So what does the dynamic of the bank account look like? How profitable is the overall business? And bearing in mind, profit is not just to do with money, particularly in an agricultural business. Growing stock, having more heads of breeding stock on the ground, growing your asset also comes into your profit as well. So we can have the position where you land up with less money, but a profit. You've made a profit, which can be tricky when it comes to paying a tax bill. So that's why we want to monitor a budget to know what the cash flow impact is, what the profitability impact is, and if you know something's coming, you're better placed to deal with it. And the other thing is your capital position. So how much are you actually worth? And I would say for those who are expanding a business by taking on a tenancy, the capital position on your accounts is often, almost always, very different to your actual true farmer's balance sheet. So the balance sheet produced by your accountant often has a historic value for historic value for livestock and historic value for the land. Now we need to make sure that you're comfortable that you're actually, what's your true value. So if your cows are valued at £150, we need to do a farmer's balance sheet to show that actually those cows are nearer to £1,500, and your farm's no longer worth 100,000; it's actually worth 1.5 million or something. And then you've got you can show how strong a capital position you're actually in, and that's certainly an advantage. But that's not a massive, owning land isn't a massive selection criteria for taking on for winning a tenancy. There's most of the ones I've been involved in actually in the last wee while have been relatively new entrants, people who've been renting small blocks of land here and there, growing assets, growing lean, profitable businesses, and then putting a really good case together to get that longer term base. So yeah, it's not all about having massive amounts of capital tied up in land or buildings or anything, but having a true understanding of where your capital value is actually really good for you to know as an individual as well. And then cash flow, the cash, if you're establishing a business, cash is king. We must have a positive, or we must have a good cash flow, and we must know where that cash flow is going. So in the first few years, particularly of any business, taking it, be disciplined about it, and do track your cash flow and know what's coming, both in terms of inputs and outputs. Some useful links. I'm conscious we're on a wee bit of a whistle stop tour on this one, but on the Farm Advisory Service website, there's a lot of good stuff there. It's been building up over the years of the existence of FAS, and there's a lot of good business planning tools, as well as some specific tenancy tools as well. So what can you do when you're applying for a farm tenancy? And what I will say, so we've got our Farm Advisory Service hat on and also our SEC hat. We are happy, really happy. Our business is built round about business planning and cash flows and things. But I'm really happy for a lot of that groundwork to be done before you come to me. So if you use these resources, you may be in the position, could be in a position where you can do your whole tenancy application yourself, and that's a fantastic place to be. We can be used to sense check it, to add a wee bit value to it, to take the bare bones of it forward into a full business plan, we're happy to come in at any point for that. And it's also worth saying there's a lot of other FBAS accredited consultants out there out with SAC who will also be happy to help you with it. So I would say it's one where applying for certainly a longer term tenancy, it's a major stage in your life, and if you really want to do it, is worth investing quite a lot of time and a wee bit of money into it just to make sure that you're in the best place possible. But yeah, Farm Advisory Service website's well worth a look for that. That's where this recording will be, so those links are available on the videos, and the slides are available on there too. So that's that. So yeah, summary of that, basically business planning is an essential part of any business. So make sure when you're producing a tenancy or when you're applying for a tenancy, the business plan you've got there is true to form. It's something that it reflects the business you're going to run, and also becomes a useful working document for years to come. Budget and monitor. I can't emphasize it enough how important that is, particularly in these changing financial times. Budget monitor is a really powerful tool, and that does include an A4 bit of paper, ins and outs. You can monitor things yourself, or you can do it through your accountant. There's a lot of good accounting packages out there that can also help you with that. And yeah, when it comes to the tenancy, we'll go into questions just in a moment, but sell yourself as best you possibly can, and within that, the only difference in a tenancy application business plan is you want to put a lot more emotional stuff in, a lot more non-financial, non-business stuff about you, your family, what you've done, your list of achievements. Your CV is a really strong part of this, because the person that they're renting the farm to is also a big part of it's the two people, the right landlord and the right tenant. If we can do that, the rest of it, if we get the right two people, the rest of it should follow. So yeah, do put some effort into it. The good thing is grant funding, the new entrant grant funding world isn't as exciting as it has been in the past. However, for us all, there is a business advice support available through integrated land management plans, which is an 80% grant funded business plan, or can be used for business planning, plus 2 bits of specialist advice, which can be between 80 and 100% funded. So there's a chunk of business work can be done without any significant cash cost to you. And then also through that, we can also do a carbon audit and things as well. It depends where you are. If you're an expanding business, a carbon audit is probably a very good thing to include as part of your tenancy application, to show where, assuming it's a positive story, but if you can show that you're an efficient business and you're driven by your decision making is driven by carbon and climate change and financial thinking, that carbon audit could be really useful. If you're a really new startup business, carbon audit is probably less important. But certainly there's funding through there, funding for that through a farm advisory service through the ILMP, and also through PSF, Preparing for Sustainable Farming. So yeah, that's pretty much what we were hoping to cover the bare bones of. But what we'll do is stop sharing and go into a few questions. So we've got a couple. So this one, Jennifer, is about new entrants. So we'll both take this. I'll put it to you first because someone's got to ask it. But what do you need to be classified as a new entrant? So if you're currently self-employed as an agricultural contractor, you've built up your business and machinery, but you've got no land and livestock, does that classify you as a new entrant?
So long as you haven't held I think I'm right in saying if you haven't held a holding number or I think livestock, I think there might be a time limit on that. Robert, you'll know more than me on that one at the moment. But yeah, new entrants, just anyone that is just new to a farming business.
There's two, to me, there's two new entrants. So there's the new entrant that you define yourself as, which is, you're in this case, you're definitely a new entrant. So this is someone who's growing, probably a first generation farmer growing a business. Definitely that's a new entrant. However, the department a definition of a new entrant is basically 5 years from within 5 years from your first claim. So if you had submitted an IAX and maybe a beef calf claim, the clock starts ticking. The thing is, as well, I suppose, is there is no new entrant funding as things stand at the moment. So it's not the issue it used to be. The only, I suppose, that's not true. There is a young farmer's top up on an IAX. So there is on your BPS, your first 90 hectares can get an additional top up if you're under 41 and within 5 years of starting up starting up as head of the business. But there's no capital funding. There's nothing exciting out there at the moment for that new entrant purpose. So hopefully that answers your question. So actually, you've come back in, so that's good. You don't have you don't have a holding number, and you've never made a claim. So yes, you would definitely I think from what you've told us, Rob, you would definitely qualify as a new entrant, and particularly if for taking on the tenancy. I think, to be fair, we probably need to take that one offline and have a conversation with us, our local advisor or somebody, just to make sure we're not speaking out of turn. But there are opportunities there, including the National Reserve. If you've never held entitlements and you're applying for new entitlements, so there are points to discuss, but we could also stumble down a rabbit hole here too. So
I was just going to mention that not rightly or wrongly, landlords do sometimes favour new entrants as they have the option of getting accessing the National Reserve if they do qualify, either as a young farmer or new entrant, and that can be attractive as entitlements and single farm payment are still important incomes for the farms. Not always the case, but it can be a preference for some landlords. But if Rob, if you're in a case where you're taking on a 1991 Act, so a secure tenancy, if it's a family one, there's not a huge amount of advantage of being a new entrant in that sense. In terms of taking on the tenancy, that's fine. But yeah, I think that'd be a conversation that's a more personal, case by case for you. But happy to provide additional information if you're looking for something on that.
Yeah. Again, that one, if you're looking to succeed a tenancy as well, that's where you really need, and there's not a vast amount of advice. There's a heap of advice out there. It's not a massively complicated thing to do as long as we do it right. But certainly, if there's a pre-91 Act tenancy at stake, make sure that we tick all the boxes we need to tick to make sure a seamless transition from parents to you, or whatever the story is. So there was a question there. Sorry. The question here is, can you apply as a couple? So in this case, we've got both would be classified as new entrants. One has a degree, one has the hands-on experience. Absolutely. And those tenancies that go, in some cases, some estates have been actually looking for kind of the family story, or the young couples getting in. It shouldn't be it's not discrimination. You can apply as individuals as well, but often applying as a couple, you can create quite a nice story in terms of your business plan and what you intend to do with the place. So yeah, would you agree, Jennifer? Would you make the most of that story?
Absolutely, yes. Sell yourself. A landlord's giving you a huge asset that they own, whether they've however they've come about it. So they are trusting someone with one of their biggest assets. So they need to be secure in knowing that whoever's taking it on has the ability to farm it. So whether that's you don't have to have been a farmer to take it on, but have got the experience and any background. A degree is super, but even just practical experience. If you're taking on a sheep farm and you've never dealt with sheep before, that's going to put up red flags with them a wee bit. They want to know that you've maybe spent time lambing or being helping a shepherd, or things like that. They're looking for key things that will give them the reassurance and confidence in you as the tenant coming on.
Yeah, there's another good question here actually about what to include in the introduction. So if we're trying to hit the landlord between the eyes with everything that we want to do, what are landlords looking for, and what would really make you stand out in this section, Jennifer? You got any experience of that? It's probably a similar answer to what we've just done.
Yeah, it's the reality is when you're applying for tenancy, your first protocol is going to be the landlord's factor. It's very rare a landlord will be the one doing the advertising and undertaking the applications. So you want to be putting in a really confident, concise application. Get to the point. What's your experience? Why do you want to farm it? What's your future vision for the farm? Work on family connections or business connections. Use references. Don't be shy, because if tenancies are so few and far between that you don't want to miss this opportunity. So give it all you've got. And but you also have to have a good relationship. You're going into a business situation, so you need to be using good language, good grammar as well is important. And if you're not confident in that, there's plenty of people out there that can help with preparing even your CV and such like. So just being really confident in your application is an important thing, and just experience is the main thing really for being if you're new into it. Can I also just add a wee bit about just being conscious of costs as well? So when you go into a tenancy, you're still going to have just be conscious that when you're going into tenancy agreement, you're aware of any obligations. So I mentioned earlier, fixed equipment, you'll need to do a record of condition. That is a cost to the landlord and the tenant. So there's, just be aware of any additional things afterwards once if you're successful. Once you're in, it's not just freewheeling, there is extra wee bits and pieces that you need to take care of.
The two things I think I would say, going back to the question of what to include, there's nothing worse than interviewing or reading stuff that's not positive, or interviewing somebody that's really negative. I think if you want in here, you want to be going in as if you're someone who's not going to cause the estate any hassle. You're not starting off by telling them what they've done wrong in terms of timings, or in terms of what's wrong with the farm, or it's all about what's right with it. If you then get questioned, and when it comes to interview, if you then get questioned on what is wrong, you've obviously got to give answers on that, but you also swing everything to the positive, because ultimately you want to look like you should really be applying for a farm that you're in love with and you really want to get. So I think keep it positive, and the keeping it concise. The introduction, the executive summary shouldn't be 3 or 4 pages long. It should be really, bang, bang, bang. Here's who we are, what we do, all the good stuff about what we do, what we're going to do with the farm, and how, what rent we're going to offer. I think sometimes we get, when we come to CVs and things, we get, most people will have a CV from the past sitting somewhere. When you're applying for a tenancy and you're 40, it's really not that relevant what you got for your standard grades. It's really about relevant experience. Putting in that you've got some standard grades would be fine, but saying that you got a 2 for standard grade technical is really not of importance. So I think keep that stuff concise as well, and sell the stuff that you think they want to hear. And I think finally, Jennifer, we spoke offline before this about rental values and things. Things have changed a lot. The industry's probably been in a really strong position for the last few years. There's some big rents going about. What do you do? What would you say about, having an upper limit on what you're willing to offer, or how much do you offer to make sure you get it?
That's a golden question. You have to be realistic. Don't put in a figure that you can't service. When it If a landlord's factor's doing his duty, it's not necessarily the highest bid that will always get the tenancy. In some cases it is. Some people are just very money orientated. But if you're doing it, practicing it right, you want someone that can offer a good rent, but also can actually farm the business and isn't just putting in a figure. You've got to back up that figure with, as we've already talked about, your business plan, your cash flow, if you've got existing business, you can use that, or you're projected, and how you need to be realistic, and don't, there's no point in going into this and then realizing 2 years down the line you can't service the rent. You know, you're not going to do yourself any favors, and you're going to make yourself very stressed. And you have to look after yourself. Priorities, you look after yourself, and if you can't, if you're stressed and you're worried, you're not going to make a good job of it. So it's a hard one, and it's a case by case scenario how much what you're going at. But if you've got a good experience base and a good application, that stands you in a good stead as well.
And I think one, I'm saying be positive, I'm going to probably finish here on a negative, is I'm actually, we'll go back to the rugby at the weekend, and a Scotland-France game, obviously this is filmed, so if we're out of sync, Scotland-France game obviously didn't quite go to plan at the end. Be like Finn Russell. When it comes, if you're not successful in this tenancy application, most of the time you're applying for a tenancy from a fairly big landowner who has other opportunities down the line. Don't be the person that throws the toys out the pram and makes a big deal out of not getting it. Do go out and be positive and say, you know, I'm disappointed I didn't get it, but here's what we have to offer, and we'll be really interested to discuss any other opportunities you've got coming forward, because often there's something else up their sleeve. There's a smaller farm or even a bigger farm. There's something else coming in the next year or two, and quite often we see a wee deal being done for the underbidder or someone who was second. Quite often gets a good turn if there's something else coming down the line. So definitely, if you're unsuccessful, it's disappointing, but be positive and make sure you're still selling yourself for the next opportunity that's coming.
Yeah.
And also, I think on the upper limit, just to reiterate what Jennifer said, is you have to offer what you are comfortable that you can afford. And if you can't afford what the highest bidder offers, and they do go for the highest bidder, well, good luck to them, because they've obviously seen something, or they're going to do something bigger, better, or whatever than you're going to do, and you move on and go somewhere else, because there's some wild numbers often banded about at the moment. And I think some people who've entered tenancies at high rents will struggle going forward. So I'm sorry, that was a very negative way to end. We are out of questions, and we've held on to everyone who came into the meeting at the start, so that's good. As I say, this recording will be on the Farm Advisory Service website. The one slide I didn't put up, but it's really important, is feedback. So we need feedback. Positive feedback's nice, but negative feedback also helps us to tailor these things a wee bit better as well. So you'll get a feedback form sent out. It'd be really good if you could fill that out. It'll take 2 minutes, but it gives us a bit of a handle on where we're at. Do feel free to give either Jennifer or I a shout, and certainly we'll be happy to help. There'll be more tenancy stuff coming forward through the Farm Advisory Service, and hopefully, you know, it is an exciting opportunity if a tenancy comes up, and hopefully we see an industry where there's more tenancies and contract farming arrangements and things come up as the industry evolves. So yeah, hopefully that's been useful. Jennifer, thank you very much on behalf of everyone here and on behalf of Farm Advisory Service. That's been great.
Thank you.
Perfect. All the best, everybody. Thank you.